The first story that we're looking at revolves around family. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I think family is sometimes the hardest people to communicate the grace of God to. I don't know, any nods in the house? Anyone want to share that sentiment? My extended family, I love them dearly, but it's a mess. Lots of broken relationships. For 12 years, my dad hadn't spoken to anyone on his side of the family until I had gotten an Xbox. And I started playing after I was a youth worker at the time. And after Friday night youth club, I'd go home and decompress by playing Xbox. And I noticed on Facebook, you know those days when everyone was on Facebook? I noticed on Facebook that my cousin had also started playing Xbox. And he put up his gamer tag, which for the uninitiated is basically like a code name that you can like search up and then you can play with that person. So I thought, I haven't seen this guy in 12 years. This might be fun. So we started playing Xbox every Friday night together. He was pretty good. I was being carried along by him. And then his dad, who was around the same age as my dad, he wanted to hang out with his son more. And so he bought an Xbox so he could play alongside his son on an Xbox, and they would both be playing every Friday night. And now I was playing with my uncle and my cousin every Friday night. And in between games, when we were kind of meant to be debriefing and talking about strategy, I was there bringing up awkward family situations that could deal with some reconciliation. And one of those was, at the time, my nan got super sick and was close to death. And my dad can't drive, and so I just reached out to my uncle and said, would you mind picking up my dad and taking him to see his mum because he's finding it really hard getting to her? And he was like, sure. So around her deathbed, for the first time in 12 years, she had all of her children around the deathbed, and they reconciled, all because I bought an Xbox. That's what I take from that. Now, I know and understand firsthand the idea that family reconciliation is terrifying, and it is always easier to flee. Am I right? Right? And some of you have come today to church this morning to hear this from me, and it's don't flee that. Don't run away. Don't chase comfort over reconciliation. But also know this, that Jacob, who is someone we find in the book of Genesis, the first book of our Bibles, has gone through his life being the cause of so much family strife. And just before he gets his family reconciliation moment, he first gets a night of wrestling. Jacob's story begins before he is even born. In Genesis 25, God tells his mother Rebekah that the two boys inside her womb will become two nations, and the older will serve the younger, which wasn't the normal way of things. From the start, there is tension even within the womb. Jacob is born second, grabbing the heel of his twin brother Esau. His name Jacob literally means the one who grasps or the one who strives. And so his whole identity is based around grabbing, tripping up, deceiving, and that becomes a pattern of his early life. And as a young man, Jacob takes advantage of his older brother Esau's hunger, and he trades a bowl of stew for Esau's legacy and his birthright, his inheritance. And then later, with the help of his mother Rebekah, he deceives his father Isaac and steals the blessing meant for the firstborn. It's a crazy story, way weirder than all of your family barbecues put together. But there's something about it that works. It fractures the family, and Esau is furious, and Jacob has to run for his life. And on his first run, Jacob has his first major encounter with God at a place called Bethel. He dreams of a ladder reaching up to heaven with angels ascending and descending. It's where Led Zeppelin got their idea about Stairway to Heaven from. God promises him the same covenant first given to Abraham, a promise of land and descendants and a future and generations that are going to bless the nations. But Jacob is still very much trying to control his own life. And he travels to the household of his uncle Laban. And what follows is 20 years of complicated family drama. He falls in love with Rachel, one of Laban's daughters, and he works 7 years to marry her, and then is deceived into marrying her other sister, Leah, instead. And so we see the deceiver, Jacob, becoming the deceived. And then over 2 decades, Jacob ends up building a huge family, great wealth, and an incredibly complex household. 12 sons who are born will later become the tribes of Israel. And the whole time there is rivalry, manipulation, and tension with his father-in-law and uncle Laban. You thought your family was messy. And eventually, God tells Jacob, it's time to go home. And so he leaves with his wives and his children and flocks and begins the journey back to the land God had promised. But there's one huge problem waiting for him there. It's his older brother, Esau. The last time Jacob saw Esau wanted to kill him. Not in the way that like my siblings wanted to kill me when I stole the Xbox remote or stole the TV controller. He wanted to kill him with like sharp things and stuff. And Jacob hears Esau is coming towards him with 400 men. The pass he's been running from for 20 years is suddenly standing right in front of him. Jacob is terrified. He divides his family into groups. He sends gifts ahead to try to appease Esau, and he spends the night alone by the river. And this is the moment where everything changes. We read this in Genesis 32. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, which is a river. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him, and as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Now, I know as we're reading this, you're thinking, if only in England we knew a little bit more about wrestling and grappling, or if only we had a pastor who loved to use his pocket money to learn how to be a better grappler. Have no fear, guys. Now, it's a small kept secret, but I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, and I love nothing more than spending my Monday nights or Friday nights rolling around, grappling with other fully grown men in white pajamas. And so this is a favorite passage of mine of Scripture. And I want to, because I've got the microphone and you don't, give you 5 real quick lessons about what I've learned from jiu-jitsu and how it's improved my walk with Jesus, and then we'll go back to the Bible passage. Are we okay to do that real quick? Brill, I don't even care if you say no. The first thing is this. There is immense power to be found in gentleness. Jiu-jitsu is Japanese for literally the gentle way. Now, when you see people doing jiu-jitsu, it doesn't look all that gentle. It involves punches and kicks and throws and submissions. But victory doesn't require overwhelming force and brute strength, but redirection of someone else's physical energy. Control, not domination, is the key. And one of the things that forces a loss way quicker than anything else is panic, breathing too quickly, and sudden reactive jerky movements that can often result in injury. Proverbs 15 verse 1 says this: "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." And when Timothy is being coached by Paul in how to grow leaders in the church, he says this: "The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Opponents must be gently instructed." I know this to be true, that your Christian influence, whether in the workplace or in the home, will grow through calm wisdom, through patience and kindness, that will have far greater fruit than aggressive assertion. Power in gentleness. Secondly, strength through submission. When you do jiu-jitsu, you yield to force to control it. Submission is not weakness, but it's a strategy. Also, you have to know at moments when to tap to avoid injury and focus on learning rather than struggling for a win. What happens all the time when you train with someone who hasn't been to jiu-jitsu for as long is they will try and use all their physical force, all their physical dominance, all their physical aggression, and sometimes encounter injuries because they don't know when to say stop. Your influence will grow through calm wisdom, not aggression, but also through submission. And it's a biblical principle. James, Jesus' brother, puts it this way: submit yourselves, therefore, to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. So much of our spiritual energy is used to try and resist the devil through that, rather than just submitting ourselves to God, and the devil will flee from us. We're told in the book of Philippians that Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. Spiritual power comes through submission to God and walking in humility. 3 more. Self-discipline and training. One thing I know about my trainer is that he does the same thing every week, 3 times or 4 times a week, and has done for 30 plus years. Consistent, disciplined practice. Not just physical, but mental and emotional control. It has been awesome. One of my favorite things about jiu-jitsu is all 3 of my daughters do jiu-jitsu. And it is wonderful to see them, but often they want to move to a new move or a new technique way quicker before because learning something new is cool. However, sometimes they haven't yet done the previous thing, and yet they think they're ready to take on the world. They learn one thing, and they're like, get me in the playground. Now, some of us do that, don't we? We might have read a gospel, and we're like, I'm ready to preach. Or we've led worship once, and we're like, I'm ready to lead a global movement. I mean, technically you are, because the same spirit that rose Jesus from the grave now lives in you. But what I also know is that self-discipline and consistency is going to be the thing that's going to steward the gift that you have. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, everyone who competes in the games, he's talking about the Olympics, goes into strict training. But I discipline my body and keep it under control. Effective leaders are formed through disciplined lives, integrity and self-control, not just flashy acts of character. Fourthly, opposition can be used for growth. Resistance from opponents, when you're wrestling, when you're grappling, becomes a means of advancement. You often use the force of your opponent to counterbalance, to provide momentum, and reverse the position so that you're in a more dominant place. Struggle is embraced as a learning tool. And that reminds me of what Paul writes in the book of Romans. We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character. And in Genesis chapter 50, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Oppositions and trial is where spirituality is formed. It's very rarely when you're on a sun lounger in Magaluf that suddenly God is going to reveal something about your character to shape and form you. I know that most of my character has been shaped and formed in trials, in valleys, in darkness, in pain, through weakness. And finally, servant leadership. One thing I've noticed about my instructor is they lead by empowering others, not by just dominating them. It'd be very easy for him to demolish everyone in the room all the time. And yet one way I get better is by training with people who are less experienced than me. Mark chapter 10, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Our influence will grow through lifting others up, not seeking personal power. Now back to Jacob's wrestle. One thing we got to notice straight off the bat is that he is finally alone. The writer intentionally says that Jacob sends all his family and possessions over across the river. Can we just give a really small clap for what's just happened there? I think it's a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing. Notice the writer intentionally says that Jacob has sent his wives and his kids and all his possessions over the river. Everything that he strived for, everything that he's manipulated for, everything that he's tried to coerce and grab at, he's now removed from where he is. And he's now left alone with the one thing that he hasn't strived for, God. And then notice who initiates the wrestling. God initiates the wrestling. If you're anything like me, sometimes we haven't heard from God for so long that we then just fill all our emptiness with stuff. I feel like I haven't heard from God for a while, so now I'm going to fill any quiet time with either a podcast or a Netflix show or another fiction book, whatever. I'm just going to fill it with stuff because actually I can't really face up to the disappointment. I can't face up to the void. I can't face up to the silence that I'm experiencing. And some of those things are helpful, but so often we just reject the Sabbath call for ourselves, which is to make our life simpler so God can speak, so he can be with us as we make alone time available for God. So what's God using to isolate you at the moment, that you're just filling with stuff? Have you got arenas that are available for you to wrestle with God and surrender to him? We're just filling any quiet moment with noise and with activity. I became a Christian when I was 16, but I will tell you the truth that it wasn't like all singing, all dancing the minute I gave my life to Jesus and I was like levitating off the floor and singing Kumbaya wherever I went. For the first 2 years of me becoming a Christian, I didn't quite know how to marry up my newly Sunday crew and hanging out with the Bible and singing worship songs, and then my Monday to Friday crew, which definitely wasn't those people. And so I would try and do both things really well. I'd try and be the best person at the parties and party really wildly, and then I'd be like a really great, hands in the air, Bible out person at church on Sunday. And it was 2 years I was managing that tension. 2 years I was really thinking I'm smashing it in both of those things. I'm not losing any friends, and I'm still doing the church thing, and it's all good. And it all came crashing down one Sunday morning. I had a pretty heavy night the Saturday night before, which probably for a 17, 18-year-old, it's probably like 2 pints or something. But I was sat on the back row at church. The band started up with that song that we all know, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And a few things happened all at the same time. The first thing that I realized is that God's grace isn't just a for everyone grace. I mean, it is technically, but it's also for me. And his grace means that I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not. His grace means that he does the heavy lifting, so I may be saved. His grace means that he does all the hard work, and so I'm able to submit and surrender to him because he does the heavy lifting. But also in the moment, I felt God say, in the very kind and very corrective way that he often speaks to me, I heard him say, well, you've tried doing it your way. How about trying mine? And the thing is, my way was far more complex, far more difficult, far harder to try and keep everything all at the same time. And his way is a way of light and life and peace. The thing is, what we see in this wrestle is God does wound Jacob, but not to destroy him, but to transform him. And our passion of mine is that we try and make sure that every preach that we have at the front of Penny Lane has a good dose of vulnerability. Because when I see Paul, who wrote a massive chunk of our New Testament, talking about how we communicate the gospel, he says that he himself is the worst of sinners, right? St. Paul, he calls himself the worst of sinners. And he says that it's in his weakness God's perfect glory, God's glory is made perfect in his weakness. Now, as a show of hands, who wants to see God's glory? Anyone? A couple of us. Who wants to see God's glory made perfect? Oh, yeah, cool. Paul says the equation for us seeing that is letting our weakness show. Now, I don't know about you, but it's very tempting to walk into a lovely gathering of Christians and quickly put up our strength. Be like, oh, yeah, cool. What podcast do you listen to? Because I'm listening to 14, all by different church pastors. Or what book are you reading? Yeah, sick. I love Tim Keller's thing. Oh, yeah, bro, this is how I've been doing with my... Rather than saying, you know what? This is actually what's going on in my life. This is where the pain is. This is where the hurt is. Thing is, what I realized from this story is when you've encountered the grace of God, you'll probably end up walking with a limp. Now, recently I had a shoulder injury because I'm approaching 40 and I'm trying physical exercise, and so those things happen. And I went for a sports massage. Anyone else been for a sports massage? Okay, a few of you, and you're all like nodding, being like, no, don't do it. I think I got as much joy out of a sports massage as I did the one and only time I got a back wax, right? We'll talk about that another day. But sports massage, you pay money, right, that you earn. It comes into your account, and you're like, oh, yeah, wonderful, I've earned some money. And then you give that money away to someone who has a series of tools, one of which is called a blade, and they then dig their knuckles and their fingers and their elbows into your muscle that's hurting, and you pass them the money and go, thanks, that was lovely. And they say, same time again next week? And you're like, yeah, okay, bye. It is awful. It was awful. But I tell you what, the most pain I experienced wasn't in the booth where I had my sports massage. The biggest pain was after going to jiu-jitsu and saying, I'm really sorry I can't do that technique because I've got a dodgy shoulder. It hurt my pride more than the pain, or going to the gym and being like, I can't lift that because I've actually got a dodgy shoulder, or saying to my girls, I'm sorry I can't play that because I've got a dodgy shoulder. The issue that we face is when we are alone with God and we have something we want to wrestle over and there's potential pain on the other side of it, it is far easier to not do the wrestle and stay unwounded, right? Safe within our own constraints of God. We might think things like, well, God, you're never going to solve my marriage issues, so I probably shouldn't bother and bring it to the wrestle. Or you say, well, God, my mental health concerns probably aren't your concerns, so I won't even bring them to the mat and the wrestle. Or God, my loneliness is just a me thing. There really isn't much God can do, so I'm probably not even going to engage in the wrestle. So what's the point? But I know this, that the wrestle with God in painful times doesn't always lead to immediate resolution. It often leaves us wounded, but it always leaves us more reliant on God. At the moment, my older sister is super sick with a really aggressive form of cancer. And I know when I'm wrestling with God over her healing, asking the why and how questions, each time I do that, I'm wrestling and I'm feeling less sure of my own power to save her. I'm feeling less sure about my own wisdom around how to solve the situation. I'm feeling less sure about who I am in the midst of it all, but I'm always growing in my reliance that God is faithful in the midst of it, that he knows the beginning from the end, that death is no obstacle to God's love, and he knows and loves my sister far more than I ever could, right? I heard of this story a couple of years ago, and it blew my mind in how I see the church. During the Second World War, there was this tiny little hamlet called Angloville-Saint-Plan. And amid the fighting during the Second World War, a pair of US medics from the army, from the 501st Regiment, a guy called Bob Wright and Ken Moore, they set up an aid station in the hamlet's 700-year-old church. It looks like this today. And in this church, they treated both Allied and German soldiers. The pews were used as makeshift benches as people were being sewn up and healed as they were injured. And these two army medics, they would brave the battlefield around this church, looking for the wounded to bring back into the church and treat them. They had a rule that was you can't bring your weapons inside the church, and soldiers on both sides heeded their request. At one time, a mortar shell fell through the roof of the church, through the tiles, shattering a floor tile, but didn't hit another human and didn't explode. And 2 days after the D-Day landings, 2 German soldiers emerged from the belfry who had been hiding, and they surrendered and gave themselves up. And then when the battle moved on from this tiny little hamlet, the priest was sweeping up with his congregation, trying to regain some sense of order, trying to replace some of the things that were on. But he said to them all, do not wipe the benches. We're going to lacquer over them so that people will come and they'll know us as the church of the blood-stained pews. Because in the church community, you should be able to bleed. The thing is, God can turn all of our limps into marks of encounter with him. Jacob, he gets renamed in this moment. It's a very Jesus-like thing, isn't it? Jesus goes around all the time renaming people. And here, Jacob becomes Israel. Jacob literally means the one who grabs the hill, and Israel becomes the one who struggles with God. So his battle is not against flesh and blood. His battle, his wrestle, his struggle is now going to be with God. Not by deceit, deceiving humans and trying to get what he wants, but by direct engagement with God. God doesn't change us by removing struggle, but by redeeming it, by bringing life to it. I wonder if this morning we're ready to walk with a limp as we carry his name. Because what we're told, and it's a really strange verse, and usually it's the point of the passage where people have switched off, but it says this: therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Fascinating, right? The thing is, even to this day, if you're a kosher-eating Jew, you will not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip from any animal. Why? Because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Generation after generation after generation has been transformed with how they even eat, not because of Jacob's success, but because of his struggle. The best thing that you can do for your kids, for your friend who doesn't know Jesus, for your prodigal family member, is show them where you struggle and how you find God there, rather than pretending you're a hero. One of the biggest learnings I'm having with my sister at the moment is I feel the temptation to only call her when I've got something wise to say or something practical that I can do, rather than just be present in her pain. But I know when I am present in her pain, I'm telling her I'm not the hero, but Jesus is. And so we then have this fascinating resolution between Jacob and his brother Esau, which is a bit of one of those moments. If you're like me, sometimes we overthink conflict, and then we get into the moment, have what we think is a really brave conversation, and the other person's like, what are you even worrying about? Anyone experience that? And this scene happens with Esau. It's like, well, bro, chill. Like, fine, let's carry on, let's crack on. And then what happens is we see Jacob's full circle return back to the place where he first encountered God, back to this place called Bethel, and he builds an altar. It says this in Genesis 35. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there, and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who are with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I'll build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had, and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, which means the Lord is with Bethel, not just a Spanish version of Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Notice that he does a couple of things. Notice Jacob, he purifies his household, where he's finally leading now, rather than running away and hiding. There's a couple of things he does. He first surrenders, and then he purifies, and then he worships. He surrenders by saying, God, you're my God. I will do what you ask. He purifies his whole household with their customs and all the stuff that they had brought along with them on the journey, and then he worships. And so are we leading our lives, our homes, our workplaces in a place of surrender, purity, and worship? Here's the temptation I feel almost every day. That I need to lead my family in a way that just means my kids don't get grief from their mates at school, that we can do whatever they ask for because it's nice, and I get rest when I need it. But if we're going to lead our kids, lead our households, to lead the next generation closer to Jesus, we have to lead in surrender to God, in purity of lifestyle, and in worship to God. That's why, apart from your relationship with God, if you have kids, your marriage is the single most important thing in your kids' lives. Not their Saturday classes, not their Center Parks trips or sleepovers. Your marriage is the single most important thing in their life because it shows them something of what love looks like tangibly in the home. And if you're single, widowed, married and happy, married and not so, the most important part of your day is the time you have with God. Are we leading from a place of encounter with God, or are we trying to run to it? So how do we lead in surrender? Well, surrender literally means just letting God lead. Letting him go first. Not coming up with great plans and saying, God, can you get on board, please? Not having really great ideas and saying, now, God, will you bless my idea? Not just personally, but in how you guide your family and your friends. Owning your mistakes in front of people. Being someone who chases conflict resolution rather than runs away from it. Praying for people and with people over big decisions, not just charging ahead and saying, well, we're going to put this deposit down, or we're going to go on this holiday, or we're going to take this job, but asking God into that moment. Trusting God with finances at the beginning of the month rather than with your loose change at the end of it. One of the ways that we try and do this in our marriage is it's more exciting than it sounds. We have a monthly marriage business meeting, we call it. It is way more exciting than it sounds because it involves food and coffee often. But what we talk about 5 things. We talk about our friendships, our family, our faith, our finances, and fun. And we say, where is this in our diary? Are we investing right amounts of time and money and energy in those areas? If not, why not? Let's ask those questions rather than what we found in our marriage is we don't only talk about those things when they're in massive deficit. So when we were skint, we were suddenly being like, how do we save our money well? Or when we were like, I'm really bored and there's no fun in my life, we'd be like, okay, we're on crisis moments. So how are we putting those plans first and foremost rather than just running towards them? You can do this if you're single too. Finding the community where you can process big decisions with and committing to people, committing to community and relying on them for help and advice and counsel around this stuff. How are we leading in surrender? But how are we also leading in purity? Now, purity isn't just avoiding sin and the naughty stuff. It's about cultivating holiness wherever we go. Holiness literally means to be separate or to be other. How are we setting boundaries on screens and shows and online habits for the whole household, starting with ourselves? What are we watching that feeds our temptation over our righteousness? How are we filtering the things we listen to and watch and being honest with others about temptation and accountability? Even me as your pastor, I'm a professional Christian. I get paid to do this. I'm not above temptation. I need my trio, my group of 2, to call out stuff in me, to pray for me when things are hard, to ask me tough questions about my marriage and my life. I need guardrails too. But we have a responsibility as parents to protect our kids' innocence by discipling them early in godly sexuality and identity, not leaving it to the culture to come up with the reasons and the things and the methods of how they should live their life. How are we confessing hidden sin to trusted friends before it destroys our witness at home or at work? How are we leading in purity? And then finally, how are we leading in worship? Now, this doesn't mean you have to go around with a guitar all around your house and sing and make it a weird thing. It doesn't have to be weird or intense. It just needs to be consistent and sincere. Are we reading scripture with those that we live with, whether housemates or family? Are we turning our households towards gratitude in prayer even when things go wrong? Are we publicly honoring God for answered prayers or provision? Are we setting a tone in our houses of thankfulness? Now, Jacob wasn't a pastor. We don't need to be pastors to spiritually lead our households, but we do need to be present and surrendered and intentional. And your friends, your family, your kids, your spouse, they don't need your perfection. They need your humility. They need your pursuit of purity, and they need to see you worshiping. And so we're going to pray for a number of things this morning. I wonder whether there's some of us who today we just need to let go a bit. We need to stop wrestling for control, stop striving and grasping the heels of what things are, stop trying to achieve God's blessing, and surrender. And start wrestling for intimacy, for contact with God, rather than second-hand blessing. Because here's what I feel God has said in my prep for this. God doesn't bless the fake version of you. He doesn't want to bless the version of you that appears on a Sunday or appears at home group. He doesn't want to bless the version of you that you think everyone else will love, or that you think everyone else will find impressive. He blesses the broken, real person who clings to him. And so let us turn back to him in surrender and recommitment.